Hello and welcome to the Max MPS Radio. My name is Jan Frisse, and today I'm honored to have Brandon Kempter on the podcast again, a second time. You were on here was it 2020? I think it was 2020, right?
I do believe, yes, 2020.
Yeah. So since you were on here before, you can do a quick introduction if you want to. So people that don't know you, who I think will be some at least, because it's just a German podcast mainly.
Yeah.
What you're up to and what you do for a living.
Yeah. So my name is Brandon Kempter. I am first and foremost, an athlete, natural bodybuilder. I compete across multiple federations, including the ICN, WMBF, and INBA. Professionally, I am a coach. I work solely online within my business, BK Conditioning, and you can find me on Instagram under the handle Brandon Kempter.
Mm-hmm. Actually, one question that just came to my mind: Do you see yourself more as an athlete or coach, or 50-50, or is it shifting?
Well, I always described that I was an athlete before I was coach, especially given that I started in the sport so young. First started to compete as a teenager. These days, I kind of switch my hats between. I think that coaching is my legacy, so to speak, and bodybuilding is being an athlete. That's my sort of hobby on the side. With that said, my love for coaching stems from my love for competing. So, like I said, I kind of switch hats as I go. That's 50-50, I'm going to say.
Cool. Do you think that will change over time, like in the near or midterm future?
I think that competing at the level of which we do is something that has an expiry date. Unfortunately, pains me to say that, and I dare say that as a natural athlete, we probably have more longevity than a lot of than potentially enhanced guys, and definitely compared to a lot of other sports in general. But there is a use by date, and when there comes a time where I feel as though I can no longer improve as an athlete, then I will probably turn the volume down a little bit. In which case, coaching will definitely be my 110% number one.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about something between the lines of 40 to 45, I mean, there's still a lot of time for you.
Yes, plenty of room, plenty of time in the tank. So, like I said, I really switch between, when I'm training, well, then I put on my coaching, my athlete hat. I'm present with my training. But, external to that, my athletes are my 110% focus between, my business hours. And whenever I choose to compete, my number one piece is that I never want my athletes to feel a difference in the service and the result of which I provide. My choice to compete is my choice. And that's one of the things of which I've learned over the years is to sort of sectionalize my life and be able to, put that athlete hat on, put that coaching hat on when I need to, so that I can be, who I need to be at that point in time.
I think we actually talked about that last time, that you don't want your people to actually notice that you are currently prepping. If you have a season where you prep athletes and you prep yourself.
I think it's an excuse for some people, I'm prepping. And I would say, yes, if you make the choice to participate in the contest prep, that's your choice. But you don't want those around you to have to, suffer for that, particularly not, in one's role as a coach, because for other people, their goals are important and I need to be there for them.
Were you always self-prepped, or did you have a coach at a certain point?
I had some phenomenal mentors early in my career that really showed me where the ceiling was for natural bodybuilding, and I'm forever grateful for that. And over the years, I mean, I have been coached in the past. My last season, although I wasn't sort of full-time coach, I had a very, very close friend of mine, of whom was a mentor of mine for many years, who overlooked my contest prep. I suppose you could say he was my eyes, because there does come a point where, as you know, where no matter how knowledgeable you are, no matter how objective you can be for others, you can no longer be objective in assessing your own physique. We are emotional beings after all, and how we feel can kind of cloud our judgment in assessing our physique. And then we start to make irrational or outright illogical decisions when it comes to modulating training and nutrition. So I did have a close friend of mine who was able to, be my eyes and ears when I was perhaps not as clear in mind. And it was immensely helpful. In fact, I think it's almost impossible to completely self-coach under your own steam. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, usually the coaches that coach themselves still have somewhat of an eye, like have somebody who has an eye on them and give them most objective feedback. Yeah. Good. So before we actually dive into today's topic or topics, what are you currently up to in your own athletic endeavor? I know you plan to compete in 2021. Did that actually happen?
No, unfortunately, COVID had other plans, and as a product of that, I have extended my off season quite considerably. In fact, the next time I get on stage, which is likely going to be the end of 2023, will be my longest ever off season, of which is good and great. I'm able to make some great progress, but as much as I love the off season, I also love the stage. So I definitely would have preferred to get on stage in 2021, but unfortunately, COVID had other plans.
So that has been a 4 years off season then, right?
Yes, 4 years.
2019.
It's crazy to think.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So actually, let's switch up questions a little bit and go with the off season question first. I think that dials in nicely. I would be interested in your coaching style and like what off-season timeframes you're usually approaching or using to get somebody significantly better for the next season, and how that may differs from like a first-time competitor to more experienced, maybe even like just older competitor in general.
Yeah, great question. Look, generally speaking, I like to work for the basis that we have a 2-to-1 ratio as a general. This is a general recommendation in that however long we basically we have 2 times the amount of off-season versus contest preparation. So let's say for argument's sake, we have a 25-week contest prep, which by today's standard would be a moderate timeline. Then I would like to have at least 2 times that volume in the off-season. So 50 weeks. So let's just round it to a year in the off-season plus the next contest preparation has us with a good 18 months between shows. Now that I think would represent a sufficient timeline to make decent progress for most individuals. For the first-time competitor, I would use that as a minimum, might go a little bit longer. For the advanced competitor, again, we might go a little bit longer. Conversely, when we start to get into sort of the masters athletes, the guys getting to sort of the end of their competitive career, I tend to do the opposite, where we tend to compete a little bit more frequently because we know that those athletes are probably not going to be able to make huge quantities of progress from the perspective of new tissue, unfortunately. And we know that getting towards the end of their career, they want to get some stage time. So oftentimes my masters athletes, we might be able to do, a year-by-year piece. And oftentimes those athletes are very good from a psychological perspective at managing the sort of diet-related side effects. So that'd be about a general approach.
Okay. And in the past, usually did somewhat of a 2 years, I would assume, 2 years plus off season for yourself? For
myself, yeah, I've had years where I've done back-to-back early in my career. And
but would that be, sorry for interrupting, would that be back-to-back like season A to season A next year, or would that be season A in the 1 year and season B in the next?
So back-to-back, sorry, yeah, I should define that. I would have been a full year between. So season B to season B, for example. Yeah. And look, I will admit back then our contest preparations were a little bit shorter. And as a product of shorter contest preparations and perhaps not achieving the level of conditioning that athletes need to today, it wasn't as disruptive. Therefore, the recovery process was much shorter. Hence, you still had sufficient time in a off-season capacity prior to digging your heels into the next contest prep. And one of the benefits of that is that absolutely no sessions were wasted because you knew you had such a limited timeline. In the follow-on, I did that on one occasion. In the follow-on, I would usually have a 2-year off-season, of which I think really represented a sufficient time to be able to really get some decent off-season progress. I mean, realistically, whenever you step on stage, you want to step on stage with something that is better than last time,
Better.
and that takes time.
Yeah, I think at a certain point there's just too much as well. It could be too much especially if you said what you said about wasting sessions. If you have like a, let's say, 4+ year off season, that has, I mean, there could be reasons to do that, like privately, business wise, or what education, academia could be in the way. But I think for the usual general competitor, something like 4 years would be pretty keen. And anything above that, you kind of lose the competitive fire. At least that's what I heard from people that did like over 4 years off season. I mean, I will be on stage the second time with a 3.5 year off season as well. So
wow,
it's been a while.
Yeah, I do think there's a point where it's too long, because then you, like you said, it's just that the goalpost that is the show is too far away to really keep that sort of fire going. So yeah, I don't think that many people have a reason to really structure a 4-year off season outside of extraneous variables that require their attention. Some of the aforementioned components, you mentioned family, academia, whatever it might be. I think 2 years, personally, I think 2 years is fantastic. It's long enough to make good progress. It's short enough to keep the pressure on.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to say it. So when we actually start about contest prep, I mean, when we look at just look at the work that you are doing, your athletes are always in shape. Like, it's incredible. They're always in really, really decent shape, and I think that's it's a really, really high standard. And I would be interested in a couple of things about that. So, like, which variables do you want to see in a certain position before starting someone's contest prep? Let's say for somebody who's working half a year with you, and then maybe even with somebody who has been on your roster for a longer time period, who you can really influence a lot because you have just so much time and room to work with.
Well, as a start, thank you very much for noticing that the guys are in good shape. Honestly, it means a lot. I definitely don't approach this sport with any ego. I just love to I love bodybuilding, and I love to let the physique speak. So when it's noticed, it's really appreciated. So yes, prior to preparation, there is definitely some fundamental components that we want to have, in alignment. Obviously, our overall size, symmetry, and proportion is going to predict our competitive potential for the up and coming season. So number one would be to make sure that we have the requisite volume of lean mass and symmetry to be competitive. Above and beyond that, I'm really big on making sure that our starting position is appropriate. And I mean that both with regard to the environment and also the body composition. So we want to make sure that we're at an appropriate striking distance from stage lean in terms of body composition. Every now and then we have an athlete we have to dig a little bit more than we'd like to as a product of starting position. But ideally, we have an appropriate starting position. And above and beyond that, like I said, the environment. We want to make sure that we've got positive habits in place. If I'm taking an athlete who is new to the sport, I'd say it'd be very hard to take someone who has been recreationally training for a couple of years, but perhaps hasn't tracked their nutrition, and then just throw them into a contest prep. I would say it might be doable, but it's going to be a pretty hard run. So I want to make sure that the athlete has some fundamental knowledge in place with regards to how to manage their nutrition, and also make sure they've got the time availability in their life to fit a contest preparation in. And for example, if someone's about to actually, we're having this conversation off air. Someone's coming in to say the back end of the most intense portion of a PhD, for example. It's a pretty tough piece to start a contest prep there. Doable for some, but tough. So we want to make sure the environment's conducive to ticking all the requisite boxes in the contest preparation to ensure our best outcome.
So what would be an appropriate position in terms of like body weight over, or just body weight over stage weight? Like what
Yeah.
would be the maximum to lose, or in percentage or absolute weight?
Yeah.
Do you have some ranges?
I do have some generalized ranges. I mean, I like to work off percentage just because it scales for the athlete's total body mass. And I would say, look, it's nice to be within, let's say, 10 to 15% of stage weight. But again, it's person dependent. I like to do a pre-preparatory phase if I have the capacity to do so, in which case we'll basically diet an athlete down to the point where they start to feel diet-related fatigue, and then basically that would signify the end of that phase, in which we come up to energy maintenance or perhaps into a small surplus for a duration prior to commencing the contest preparation. So basically, that would be something that we might do at, say, 10 to 11 months out. Okay, we could call it an extended fat loss phase because we're probably going to dig a little bit beyond what we do in a conventional mini cut. But I do like that setup if I have the opportunity to work with someone for quite some time before the commencement of contest prep.
So you do that 11 to 12 weeks before, 12 months, did you say, or 12 weeks?
So let's say, for example, if we are, let's say you're someone like myself that might get a little bit cuddly in the off season. And I do that because I find that my body is robust, strong, and can take the beating of the big weights that I need to move to make progress. So maybe at the peak of an off season, I'm probably over 20 kilos at a stage weight. So then we might do a pre-preparatory phase to pull down, let's say 6 or 7 kilos at 11 months out. So 11 to maybe, it might take, say, 6 weeks or so. And then after that, we'll basically get into a maintenance / slow gaining phase, and then commence that contest preparation at however many weeks out we need from there.
So because you have still so much room till the end of the pre-prep cut to the beginning of prep as well, you then like really conservatively and precisely gain weight, right?
Yes.
Or even maintain.
Yeah, we would likely gain through that time, but we'd be very conservative.
What would that mean on hard numbers?
In terms of rate of gain, conservative, I would say would be somewhere between, by my standards, around 0.5 to maybe 0.8% per month.
Okay, cool.
Based on weekly averages.
Yeah, I mean, cuddly is a nice word to say in terms of like your off-season shape.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got softer in the off season in past years, but in the end, the way I look at it is that each body composition, so the body composition that we embrace within each phase has function, right? Contest preps is custom built physique for the stage. It's not a robust physique. By the end, we're feeling a little bit frail by comparison to the middle of an off season. In the peak of an off season, I want to make sure I've got enough fat mass that I am healthy, strong, able to take the beating of the big weights that I need. So my recovery is in check, my adaptive potential is tip top. And I also want to make sure that, hey, we're not at a disproportionate striking distance to stage lean. So it's that sort of balancing piece.
Yeah, and I think with somebody who's as experienced as you are, I think even if you're 20 kgs over, like the first 10 kgs are so easy for you to diet off. You can correct me if I'm wrong with that, but I think just if you're an experienced dieter, like the first, let's say 10 kgs of 20 are so easy. It's like a blink of the eye. It's just
agreed. Yeah, it's like I often describe it that it really is the last couple kilos that represent 90% of the contest preparation effort. That's really, it's the last couple of kilos where you experience the diet-related adaptation. That's where you have to embrace existing with a low subjective perception of energy. It's where you got to sort of skull drag yourself around. It's where the appetite increases, etc. But for the first section, yes, I definitely. I mean, for me personally, I can diet that first 10 kilos down pretty easily with leveraging great performance, no issues with appetite, anything like that. I think that's for most people. The first section, it's the further you get away from one's, I suppose you could say, body fat settling range, the more challenging things become.
Yeah, and I would assume that you can lose that even really efficiently as well.
Yeah, relatively, I would say. Yeah.
Good. So in terms of the next question, do you think there's a certain point where where you could be potentially too lean for being too far out? And how do you make sure that that's not going to happen? Because as I said, I think it was off air. Sometimes I see pictures from people from athletes of yours that are in pretty decent shape for being, let's say, 25 or 26 weeks out. So I would assume they either just started contest prep or have been in contest prep for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a point where you can be too lean, too far out. Let's say, for example, if we're 20 weeks out and, we're sitting on striated glutes, I would say, you know what, you're probably making your life unnecessarily challenging. And I would argue that there's every possibility that the athlete comes in not looking their greatest, because being that lean is tiresome. As we were chatting about off air, being lean, it just wears at you. I kind of analogize it to running water over stone. Living a day in someone's shoes being lean is easy. Do it for months and it becomes abrasive and hard. So yes, you can definitely be too lean too early. With that said, there's a midway, right? The last thing you want is to be 10 weeks out and have 10 kilos to drop. That's not a fun time.
Yeah.
So I often say that there's a window where being relatively lean, relatively early gives you flexibility. It gives you flexibility to work in periods of energy maintenance. It gives you the capacity to, as I put it, give back to the system with periods at energy maintenance, preserve trainability and performance, etc. But it's a balancing piece. If you're too lean too early, it's definitely not a fun piece. Absolutely.
So what would be, do you have like a general percentage range of like an average rate of loss per week that you want to be in over prep?
In general, yes. What I would do if I'm going to set up a contest preparation in the planning stages is, like most, we would estimate the total volume of body mass that we must lose in order to bring the look we need, look being the most important piece, and the change in body mass being a proxy for changes in body composition. I would then put in place a rate of loss that declines across the duration of the contest preparation, because we're catering for a lesser magnitude of the energy deficit the leaner we get, so that we can bolster and protect our performance and ultimately lean mass. So we go hard and fast at the start and slow towards the end. And as a general benchmark, I'd like to be somewhere within 2 to 3 kilos off stage weight at about 10 weeks out. Obviously, a little bit in the lower end of that if I have someone of a smaller total body mass, but it's a higher percentage of their TBM. But as a general, I like to be 2 to 3 kilos off stage weight 10 weeks out. That's nice.
So that's pretty close, 10 weeks out. Pretty close, especially with 1 kg. I mean, the 1 kilogram will probably do a lot to the look, but like in absolute mass, it's just not much to lose. Although it's probably the hardest to lose.
Yeah, 2 to 3 kilos around that at 10 weeks out. But definitely, like I was saying earlier, that the last bit is definitely the hardest. So when we get to that point, that's where I like to be able to push and pull. And what I mean by that is, we can have short periods of digging, but then we can give back to the system with things like refeeds, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, this is the fun part of contest prep. It's where, good judgment comes into place from a coaching perspective, being able to read the athlete in terms of how they're responding in terms of look, and correlating that with how they're feeling, being able to interpret that, and then knowing what variables to change at the right times at the appropriate magnitudes in order to direct their physiology in the direction that we need. So that's definitely the real fun time in contest prep, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you then, like you have just told us that you are going with a more aggressive rate of loss in the beginning and then less aggressive in the later stages. Do you calculate out an average over the whole prep? Because I do. I'm just interested in if you have a number for that as well.
Tell you what, if I was going to plan, I would look at the total loss that we need over that duration. I would calculate a weekly average, and then I usually have 4 to 5 phases in a contest preparation that each encompass a different rate of loss. So that basically we're tapering it off throughout that duration. So let's say it might be phase 1 could be 25 to 20 weeks, phase 2, 15 to 15, phase 3 will be the next 5 weeks. And basically we break it down like that, plus the peak. So that gives us each section with a different rate of loss, and it gives us what I call our conditioning checkpoints. So my athletes would hear this all the time. The next big conditioning checkpoint is at this many weeks out. At this many weeks out, we want to see X, Y, Z. It's likely will be around this total body mass to bring the look that we need at this time. Now, obviously, for individuals of whom you're working with for the first time, or those of whom have not got on stage, it can be pretty challenging to judge how much weight an individual has to lose. So, we're bending the system as we go, but I think that planning is a key component, in the preparation process.
So in the last 10 weeks, you then go really, really slow. Let's say a 0.2% per week.
It could be as slow as that. Yeah. Generally speaking, let's say if you use a strategy, as I mentioned earlier, going faster at the start. Generally speaking, the first 50% of the contest preparation will encompass the majority of the fat loss, but the second half will be the most visually rewarding because the magnitude of visual progress you get per unit of fat loss increases the lesser the amount of fat mass that you have. That 1 kilo worth of fat mass that you lose going from 10 kilos total fat mass to 9 is 10% of the total fat stores versus going from 5 to 4, that's 20%. What's going to give you more visual progress? What's definitely going to be the latter. So it's an interesting process because like you said earlier, you mentioned about losing a kilo making a big difference. Well, at the end of a contest prep, it makes a huge difference. Definitely.
Whether in the beginning it would probably be no difference at all visually, or
hardly any difference.
Really, hardly any difference. Yeah.
I kind of I analogize contest preparation to like peeling back layers of Glad wrap. So if we had like the muscle there, let's say the quads, at the start of a contest prep, it's like we have 50 layers of Glad wrap, and then each week I'm going to peel back a couple layers of Glad wrap and each week I can see the underlying structures come out more and more until we're left with this, one layer of cling wrap between the outer, environment and the quad, and everything just looks plastic. So that's kind of how I think of it when I'm looking at this physique just morph and change before my eyes each week and each day.
Yeah, and as I said, I think ultimately it's super important to get that biofeedback from the athlete as well, like just their relationship to food, their training performance, most importantly when it comes to muscle retention, and probably also depending on their off-season body fat settling ranges, if you start them a little bit leaner or a little bit more cuddlier, then that I think it should be play a part as well.
100%. Yeah.
So, do you feed up your athletes into the show a lot, or do you tend to nail them and then peak them and then like nail them at the end and then peak them, or rather have them be ready a couple of weeks out and then feed them up?
Great question. And I would say this, it is in my views ideal to be in a position where you can feed up an athlete coming into their shows. It makes the process of quote unquote peaking an athlete rather simplistic. In fact, if you have increased the athlete's energy intake back to maintenance, it almost circumvents the need to peak, so to speak. So it's ideal, but you need to be very confident with the level of conditioning the athlete has during that process of returning to energy maintenance. So I wouldn't say that it's something that happens in my scenario, in my coaching, it happens all the time. Occasionally it does. What is more likely to happen is that we come into show number 1, and then following that, we close the energy gap into show 2, etc. For most people, they're competing in multiple shows. With the way things are in bodybuilding these days and so many federations available, it's not uncommon to do 3 shows. In fact, my last season, I did 7 shows in 8 weeks. It was a crazy time.
That's crazy. You did 7 shows.
That's why I only compete every 4 years. But so to answer your question, it is ideal, and there's definitely been occasions where we've had the pleasure to sort of do that. However, for a lot of people, their season is so long that we will oftentimes push into show number 1, plan to be sitting at 99 to 100% at show number 1, and then essentially maintain throughout the season by closing that energy gap.
So would you say that you can bring 100% in the first show, and then, for example, let's do another 2 or 3 shows, you can bring the 100% another 2 or 3 times afterwards? And if you
go on.
And if you do so, do you then plan to have a little bit more time between shows, or do you really do like back-to-back, week-to-week shows?
Yeah, so I definitely think that you can maintain for quite some time when you're very lean. For some time, like we said earlier, if you're too lean too early in the contest preparation, yes, that can be problematic because it wears at your being, and or it crashes you out endocrinologically, which is problematic. But most people's season is going to be anywhere from, say, 4 to maybe 7 weeks in duration. So I would argue that if you're coming into that, for that first show, if you're coming in at, say, 99% or maybe even a true 100%, you should be able to maintain that. I know a lot of guys like to get on stage at, say, 95 for the first, and then, really sort of hit it 100% for nationals a couple of weeks after. I work for the basis that if not 100%, why are you getting on stage? But realistically, all things done right, managing your variables accordingly, managing fatigue accordingly, I can't see a reason why you can't maintain at 99 to 100% throughout your season if it's only 4 to 7 weeks in duration.
One question that comes into my mind at that point: if you do like as you said, a 7-week season,
yep.
Would you then, in terms of, because I would be interested in peak week training in that duration. Like usually in peak week, you pull at least a certain part of the week and do slightly less destructive training. Would you do that for the whole 7 weeks? Because I would assume that if you do that for the whole 7 weeks, probably your look will fade a little bit.
If you're going
especially if you're 100% at the
if you're going to try and taper into every show, then I would say yes, it's probably going to be problematic. So let's say, for example, when I competed last season, going back to back, so 7 shows, 8 weeks, so back to back, pretty much all bar one. Essentially, how the training was structured for me, and again, I'm speaking in personal anecdote here. How it works for everyone else and how I would coach would be very personal, but I was basically front loading all of my high end training. Finish a Saturday show, train legs Saturday, upper, train legs again, train one upper.
You trained on the Saturday.
100%.
You trained
always
on the
train
Saturday.
Show day. Well, I was going back to back, so I needed to wash off the carbohydrate I consumed, and I was also very recovered at that part of the week. I knew I was going to get some very good training in straight after that show, and usually I'm very amped up after a show as well, particularly if it's a night show, which most of the pro shows are. So I was basically front loading 4 days of training early in the week. So I was getting most of my volume allotment in early in the piece, and then only tapering the last couple of days.
Could you repeat the microcycle? I was just interrupting you. Sorry.
You're right. So here we go. We're going to work off memory here. But it was basically Saturday we'd train after the show, train legs, and then we'd have an upper. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, last leg session. And then we get in another upper on the Wednesday, and then we'd taper Thursday, Friday into the Saturday, Saturday's legs again.
If you trained upper back to back, it would be something like a push and pull portion.
Yeah.
So not like whole upper sessions. Okay.
No. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Should have delineated that in
No,
that
no worries.
description on my behalf.
Yeah, that's pretty damn interesting. Because I was doing five shows pretty much back to back in 2019, and I faded. But we also pulled back training at the later stage of the week, and I think I got in probably like a one lower session and maybe two upper sessions per week.
Yeah.
In between shows, and I think I faded at the either third or the fourth show.
Yeah, I can definitely understand. If you are tapering down,
I was the first time as well. Could play a part.
Look, because I think from a psychological perspective, it may play a part as well from a psychological perspective in terms of your capacity to maintain your training quality across that duration between those shows. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I was prepping for quite some time at that point as well. And I mean, I also had a lot of traveling stress and that kind of stuff. So I think there were certain variables that played a part, but I would argue that like a 7-week block of shows, for example, in an 8-week period where you would be 100% in the first show, that what probably not works for a first-time competitor or junior or whatever. If you're really in like elite conditioning, and I think what did serve you well is that you are just so experienced and you did that so many times. I mean, your 2019 season, what was your season? Like what number?
1, 2. I think it was a fourth season. I think that was
fourth season. Yeah.
So definitely, for a first timer, I definitely wouldn't be doing that many shows. I think for a first timer, you want to get in, do a couple of shows. Maybe if you're feeling really great, do 3 shows. I think that would be a lot for a first timer. 2 shows would be great. Gets you some stage time, and then obviously you can go back to the drawing board, come back to it later. Anything more than 3 shows, it's a big season. It's a big season.
Yeah, probably 2 to 3, and then maybe a 4th if you're really keen to do another one. That's what I usually go for. Yeah, I mean, retrospectively, I thought rather than doing 5 shows, I should have kept it at 3. Probably 3 would be good.
Yeah,
like 7 is crazy. 7 is really crazy.
It was pretty nuts. I'm not going to lie. It was a ride. It really was. But that was, a season that I had. It was 3 years between the last between the show prior, and I was just gunning for it. I just had this vision in my mind for 3 years, and I was heading over to the US, and I was just so excited to get amongst the bodybuilding, a different countries' bodybuilding culture. So I definitely wanted to soak up as much as I could.
Did you only do shows in the US?
No, I did 3 shows, here in Australia. I did the ICN Nationals, the ICN Worlds. I also did an INBA show here. And then I went over to the US and did the INBA Universe WNBF Worlds and that small show in Portland, Oregon, of all places.
Yeah. The last one was the highlight, I would assume. I'm just kidding.
Not exactly. Unfortunately, I didn't actually know a huge amount about the geography of the USA at that time. Right. I simply jumped on the OCB website and went, you know what? We found a 3rd show on a 3rd weekend in the US. Let's do this thing and let the travel agent take care of the rest. Little did I know that Portland's not exactly notorious for its phenomenal bodybuilding standard, but it's all part of the experience,
Yeah, especially with Worlds being in front of that, like the two World Championships.
Yeah.
If we then talk about first timers, we just touched about first competition numbers for first timer. In terms of conditioning for your novice or first timer competitors, do you tend to push your first timers as far conditioning wise as a more experienced competitor? And if not, at what point do you tend to stop?
Look, it's definitely a case-by-case basis. For example, an athlete that I had who was competing in the last season, it was actually his first first contest preparation, but we'll use this as an example. In his scenario, he had a decade worth of training behind him, so overall density to his physique was phenomenal. A very educated fellow, in which case I basically prepped him like a veteran because I knew that he had the psychology for it, and he was up for it. Conversely, if I have, I suppose you could say, a more conventional first timer, well then I would perhaps be a little bit more conservative and really feel it out. One of the things that all advanced athletes have is a unique level of trainability under diet-related fatigue, and that's imperative for the retainment of muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those traits, that level of mental hardiness that one needs to, or most people at least, need to learn with repeated exposure to the dieting condition. And that makes a newbie, or better said, a first timer, a little bit more susceptible to losing lean mass in the dieting condition. So I suppose it really comes down to knowing your athlete. But oftentimes for the first timers, you need to really you need to dig deeper with the communication to see how they're really feeling. Whereas with the advanced guys, they know what they're in for. You can basically, it's more straightforward, I'm going to say. And I realize I didn't really answer your question directly, but it's a hard one to answer in absolute.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said the thing that you said about the experience and just the skill of training and just conserving your training performance in a really dieted down state. And I think that comes with experience, and that makes total sense to then be able to just maintain that more muscle fullness, more not muscle fullness generally, but just more muscle mass, and therefore fullness, or at least fullness in the look throughout the later stages in prep. That makes absolute sense. Was that the guy who is looking like a Viking who you talked about, the first timer?
Yeah. So that was Jason Cook. Yeah. He does look like a Viking. He's an incredible dude. I had the opportunity to work with him for quite some time before that show, a few years in fact. And he had a background in strongman at one point, and he was also doing some acrobatic stuff. And then one day he said, "You know what? We're about a year out from this show. I'm ready to go 100% into bodybuilding." And we created a phenomenal athlete out of him. But again, in his scenario, he had an athletic background in other sports where he had developed mental hardiness in a different way. But that still has applicability to the dieting condition,
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Usually the first time competitor is usually probably younger than him as well. Probably don't have a decade under his belt or her belt in terms of training experience. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think especially if you what I see, or what in Europe was a big topic over the last few years, is that a lot of people talked about not pushing only for the last bits of conditioning when you lose like the overall look for like the last bits of like glute conditioning or hamstring conditioning, which usually tend to come in last. And I think for first timer that potentially makes sense, because for the last, let's say, % or 2, they may lose a lot of in other areas, maybe the upper body or what.
Yeah, 100%. It's an interesting topic. I was actually chatting with someone else about this. We were talking about looking at, Jeff Rodriguez and whatnot in the early 2000s, and the phenomenal physiques we've seen from that time up to now, and the sort of trends that have sort of transpired in our sport. Looking back at that era, they had great size, great conditioning. Then we saw sort of like the Whitaker era, beautiful time in 2015 and whatnot, where conditioning was really pushed, but perhaps size was a little bit touch and go. And I suppose, more recently, we're kind of in the middle. In the end, bodybuilding is that careful balance. You can't be one without the other. I think all the conditioning in the world, without the size or symmetry, we've got gaps. And in one's endeavor to achieve their most competitive self on stage, we need to be really careful not to get really fixated on one area and then forget about the other. people always get this thing about, striated glutes, which I think is great. And for a lot of people, it does represent the sort of, it's the pinnacle of conditioning. It's highly regarded. But in achieving that, like you said, we don't want to be so hyper focused on looking at someone's glutes, but then fail to look at the rest of the physique and compromise on other areas of one's physique that makes them, inherently very competitive. Also, it is definitely a tight balancing act, particularly at the end of the contest prep, going from lean to very lean, which is, like I said earlier, that's the fun part. It's where you really got to push and pull and really keep an eye on the athlete.
Yeah, definitely a super interesting topic. I think with first timers, I mean, obviously there's a genetic component to fat loss anyway. But like with first timers, I mean, we have seen, I'm not sure if you have heard about him. He was the first timer last year under 3DMJ under Alberto Nunez.
Yes. I know you're talking
he
about.
was all over the place. He's actually a friend of mine, and he obviously was a great example of somebody who did this the first time. And I mean, look at his conditioning. It was crazy. And they actually got him ready, I think a couple of weeks earlier, like probably 4 weeks, maybe even more. Not sure.
Well, Dirk looked 90% there at 10 weeks out. That was a nice place to be. And I have zero idea as to exactly how his protocol looked, but I dare say there would have been quite a bit of that push and pull where you pull when you need to and give back to that system along the way. No doubt.
Yeah, he's just really, like, his body fat settling point is just really low. Like, I think like 6 or 7 kgs over his stage weight. He's just like satiated, like just satisfied in terms of like nutrition.
That's ridiculous.
And I think he has some, I think he drinks his calories at like 7 kgs over body weight. So
that is
over stage weight. Yeah.
That is,
it's quite interesting. I mean, I had an application from a new client a couple of weeks ago, who was doing his first show self-prepped, and he prepped himself for 7 weeks. And I was reading this. Yeah, just listen. I was reading this, and he did like a novice regional show here in Germany, and he sent me through some shots, and he had dialed in lower body. His glutes were looking like a super experienced competitor. He was prepping for 7 weeks, and he basically just lost 6 kgs in 7 weeks. And I was not believing what I saw. I mean, I will show you the pictures post podcast, but it's crazy, and there are people out there.
I call those people greyhounds. They're just lean machines, and I dare say there are a dime a dozen. Most people who maintain, say, 7 kilos over true stage weight, top level conditioning, are not going to be feeling overly great. I know for me, if I'm about 13 kilos over stage weight, I'm comfortable. But I know I probably got to go up over 15 if I want to feel robust and bulletproof under big weight. And then, that's my green zone for being able to take the punishment of the big weights in the gym. Yeah.
So one last question. Would you say that at the end, for this like really hard and full peak conditioning look, it's a matter of people having the muscle mass in the first place, but then also conserving most of it throughout prep and the experience of doing so, and pretty much conserving your training performance in later stages?
Look, I think that and a number one focus is absolutely lean mass retention. And if you want that full and quote unquote dry look, that is definitely going to be a combination of really 3 things. 1, overall muscularity. 2 is going to be overall muscularity. 2 is overall conditioning, and 3 is topping up muscle glycogen saturation to exploit that conditioning from the prior successful contest preparation.
And I mean, conditioning ultimately comes down to just having appropriate starting point in time, and obviously knowing the dieting process. But as we said, as bodybuilders, if you prep someone for the first time, they should have gone to some dieted phases, at least anyway. That's at least, yeah. And they should have count macros and stuff like that. So you're not throwing them into starting to count macros and dieting for the first time in their first contest prep. I think that's probably not the best way to do it.
That's a hard gig. I have actually worked. Sorry?
Did you ever do that? Like, did you ever had a situation like that?
I was just about to say, I have worked with an individual that comes to mind, of whom came to me at quite a young competitor, junior competitor, came to me at, would have been maybe 25, 28 weeks out, played high-level sport elsewhere in basically football, had a great physique on him, huge quads, ridiculous quads, and basically said, cool, I want to do a contest preparation. Had a big chat to him, and in the end, just thought, you know what, I do believe he's got the mentality for it. And it was a learning process, one of which he picked up very quickly, coming from having never weighed any food in his life. Now, I definitely wouldn't say that's a standard case. In most scenarios, someone comes to me in a situation like that, we're probably going to spend some time, immersing ourselves in, basic fundamental nutrition education, etc. first, and that's definitely ideal. But in the scenario of this particular gentleman I'm referring to, he had a phenomenal season. And he is these days about 1.5 times the human he was back then, as a product of a very successful off-season. So, yeah, not ideal, but does happen occasionally.
Yeah. Ultimately, I'm sure you know. I'm sure you will agree. Ultimately, we're talking about all those things in theory, but then in practice, sometimes you just have to work reactively and just go with what you have and what the situation is actually giving you, and then adapt appropriately. Yeah,
and I think that encompasses the part of the art of coaching. We have we have parameters that we like to work within, but we've got to sort of bend the protocol through the individual, which is really fun.
Yeah, it is. Cool, man. It has been nearly an hour. Do you want to plug, or please plug away your content, your stuff, your website, whatsoever?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, look, probably the best way to get to know me is on Instagram. I will admit I'm a little bit slack on other social media outlets, TikTok, etc. I'm still yet to dig my heels into that, but you will definitely find me on Instagram.
I don't think you miss out on TikTok, man.
There's just too many stupid videos on that. I know I'm going to waste too much time there. But you can definitely find me on Instagram. Please do say g'day. And, of course, you can find my website from there as well. So, Brandon Kempter, by the way, is the handle.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I mean, soon then on TikTok, I would assume.
We'll see. I'm always late to the party when it comes to social media. I was years late on Instagram as well. So,
cool. Thanks again for coming on, and have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. Super appreciated.